I found out the truth the same way I always did, by noticing the little things she didn't think I'd catch. It all started when I noticed the credit card statement. I'd been away on a business trip for the past week, working harder than ever to secure a future for my family. The last thing I expected when I came home was to find everything I had worked for slipping away. It wasn't a big thing at first. A few charges here and there, things I didn't remember buying. But then it escalated. Large sums of money were being withdrawn from our joint account. Too many to ignore. And that's when I started asking questions. I confronted her about the charges, about the odd behavior, and she told me I was overreacting. It's just a couple of things, babe. Don't worry about it. But when I pressed her for more details, she got defensive, just a little too defensive. I could see it in her eyes, the guilt. She was hiding something, but I didn't know exactly what yet. I knew she'd been acting different for weeks, more distant, more secretive, but I had no idea the extent of what she had already planned. The next day, I went to the bank. I wanted to know exactly where our money was going. I asked for a printout of all our recent transactions, and when I saw it, my heart sank. There it was, the final blow. She had emptied our account. Not just the savings, but every penny we had. All gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at the printout. It wasn't just the money, it was the betrayal. The trust one had given her for the last 6 years, gone in an instant. And then I saw something else. There it was, right at the bottom of the statement. A transfer to her personal account, under a name I didn't recognize. I tried to keep my cool. I walked out of the bank, my heart racing. I had to get to the bottom of this, but I knew I had to be smart. I couldn't let her see that I knew. She still had no idea I had access to everything, including the one thing she thought was hidden. When I got home, she was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine like everything was normal. But I knew better. My hands were shaking as I sat across from her, but I kept my voice steady. I saw the transfers. Her eyes went wide. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the panic building behind her calm facade. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice shaking just a little too much to be convincing. I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. I know what you did. I know where the money went. And I know exactly what's been going on. Her face turned pale. I could see the walls she'd built up around herself start to crack. But she didn't admit anything yet. Instead, she tried to play it off. I've been thinking about a lot of things. Maybe we should talk about getting some space. I almost laughed. Space. You don't get to take everything I've worked for and then ask for space. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I stood up and walked over to where I had hidden my laptop. I pulled it out, opened the files, and slid it over to her. Do you recognize this? I asked, my voice calm but with an edge she hadn't seen before. Things are about to get even more intense. Where I start turning the tables. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to stay updated. What would you do if you were in my position? Let me know in the comments. Leaving her standing there in the living room, alone. There was nothing more to say. I didn't need her to explain herself or beg for forgiveness. I had already made my decision, and I had already started the process to make sure I got everything back. The next day, I filed for divorce. I included everything, the stolen money, the affair, the manipulation. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, and I wasn't going to let Jared get away with it either. I called my lawyer, and we made sure that every aspect of this would be handled in my favor. I had the evidence. I had the emails. I had everything. But the best part? Emily thought she was walking away with everything. But she hadn't realized yet. I was taking back what was mine, and I wasn't going to let her or Jared have the last word. The next few days were a blur. I was too focused, too determined to let anything distract me. Emily and Jared thought they had the upper hand, but the reality was they were already losing. The paperwork had been filed, and the divorce was in motion. But I wasn't just after the house or the car. I wasn't even after the money, though that was definitely a sweet victory. What I wanted was to make them understand exactly what they had done to me. I wanted them to know that their actions weren't going to go unpunished. I spent every waking hour putting everything together. The emails, the texts, the receipts. I needed to make sure Emily couldn't spin this into something that made her the victim. She wasn't the victim, I was. But then I hit a snag. I received a call one evening. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me it wasn't just a random telemarketer. "Hello," I answered, my voice steady but cautious. "Is this Mark Ellis?" The voice on the other end asked. "Yeah. Who's this?" "I'm with the law firm representing your wife. We've got an urgent matter we need to discuss." I was immediately on alert. "What's this about?" "We're trying to reach a settlement," the lawyer said. "Before this gets too messy, your wife is willing to negotiate a fair agreement. She wants to discuss terms." I clenched my fist. So now, after everything, after the money she'd stolen and the betrayal she'd caused, she wanted to negotiate? I had a choice. I could agree to meet her, maybe try to work something out. Or I could let her think she still had some control over this situation. But that's not how I was playing this game. I took a deep breath and made my decision. "No deal," I said firmly. "I'm not negotiating. I'm taking this to court. And I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what you and Jared did to me. Every single detail." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Mr. Ellis, I strongly recommend you reconsider. This could get ugly." "I'm not the one who made it ugly," I replied. "Your client did. And now, she's going to pay for it." I hung up the phone and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The moment I'd been waiting for had finally arrived. Emily thought she could run. She thought she could pull the wool over my eyes. But I was ready to make sure she and Jared felt the weight of their actions. The following week, I sat in a small cafe, the dim light flickering overhead as I prepared for the meeting with my lawyer. I hadn't heard from Emily since the call, but I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried to reach out again. She'd have no choice but to deal with the consequences now. I was ready. When the meeting began, I walked in and placed a folder full of evidence on the table. The lawyer glanced at it and raised an eyebrow. "Looks like you've got everything covered," he said, impressed. I smiled. This is just the beginning. As the days passed, the pressure began to build. Emily's lawyer called again, this time with a much more urgent tone. "We need to talk about the terms of the settlement," he said. "Your wife is willing to give you a fair share, but we need to work something out quickly before it goes to trial." I sat back in my chair, my arms crossed, letting the silence hang between us. "Tell her to stop wasting her time. I'm not interested in any more deals. She'll get exactly what she deserves." The lawyer seemed to hesitate. "Are you sure about this? This could drag on for months, possibly years." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steady. "I've waited long enough for justice. Now it's time to take back what's mine." The day of the trial finally arrived. The tension was unbearable. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering everything I could find. Every email, every bank statement, and every text message between Emily and Jared. I wasn't just fighting for the house, the car, or the money. I was fighting for my dignity, my peace of mind, and my future. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't angry. I was ready. This was my moment to make everything right. Emily was sitting on the other side of the courtroom, her lawyer whispering in her ear. She looked nervous, her face pale and her hands shaking. I could see her trying to compose herself, but deep down, I knew she was terrified. She knew what was coming. She knew I had the truth on my side. Jared was nowhere to be seen. I hadn't expected him to show up. After all, he was the one who had caused this whole mess. He had been the one to betray me. But that didn't matter. This wasn't just about him. This was about Emily and the lies she had told to everyone, including me. The trial began with Emily's lawyer presenting their case. They tried to paint her as the victim, claiming that I was neglecting her while I was overseas, that she had been forced to make decisions on her own. They tried to twist the narrative, but I wasn't buying it. I knew exactly what they were trying to do, but when it was my turn to speak, I didn't let them off the hook. I stood up, calm and composed, and addressed the court. I've spent the last few months trying to understand how this happened, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. But the truth is, I didn't fail my marriage. She did, I said, pointing to Emily. She sold my car. She emptied our joint account. And she moved in with my best friend. You don't get to steal from someone and then pretend like nothing happened. You don't get to betray a person you promised to love and then walk away without consequences. I could see Emily flinch, but I didn't stop. And I'm not just here to ask for what's mine. I'm here to make sure she understands that no one gets away with this. The truth will come out, and it's time for her to pay for her actions. The room was silent as I sat down. Emily's lawyer didn't know how to respond. I had just turned the tables on them. I had shifted the narrative from one of her being a poor, neglected wife to one of a betrayer who thought she could get away with breaking the law. Now it was their turn to scramble. The following hours were a blur of legal jargon, motions, and rebuttals. But I wasn't worried. I had everything, the evidence, the truth, and a solid case. Emily's lies were starting to unravel, piece by piece. Her lawyer had no way of defending her actions, and I could see Emily growing more anxious by the minute. Finally, it was time for closing statements. Emily's lawyer tried one last time to shift the blame, claiming that I had been negligent in communicating while I was away. But I wasn't buying it. In my closing statement, I made it clear, this isn't about neglect. This is about betrayal. This is about fraud. I trusted my wife, I trusted my best friend, and they took everything from me. But I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for justice, and justice will be served. The judge nodded thoughtfully, his expression stern. He didn't say anything right away, but I could tell he was processing everything. Emily's fate and Jared's were now in his hands, and I felt calm. I didn't care about the money anymore. I didn't care about the house. I cared about the truth. I cared about making them pay for what they did to me. The hours dragged on as the judge deliberated. Every second felt like a lifetime. Emily sat across from me, her face pale, her hands shaking. She wasn't speaking anymore. I could tell she knew the end was near. Jared still hadn't shown up, and I wasn't surprised. He wasn't brave enough to face the consequences of his actions. He wasn't ready to take responsibility for what he had done. But he wasn't going to escape this. Not now. Finally, the judge returned to the courtroom. He looked at both of us, his gaze sharp. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. The court has reviewed all the evidence, the judge said. His voice was steady, deliberate. It is clear that there has been a breach of trust. The actions taken by the defendant, Emily Ellis, were not only morally wrong but legally questionable. There is evidence of financial fraud, and the betrayal of a spouse and a friend is a matter that cannot go unaddressed. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't sure what to expect next, but I knew it wasn't going to be good for her. The judge continued, his eyes now focused directly on Emily. As such, the court rules that all assets gained during this marriage are to be returned to Mr. Ellis. Additionally, due to the fraudulent actions undertaken by the defendant, this court will be pursuing a further investigation into the handling of the finances and the funds that were moved. Emily's face drained of all color. I could see her fighting to keep composure, but I knew the truth had finally caught up with her. The facade she'd built, her perfect little life with Jared, was falling apart. The court session concluded shortly after, and I stood up, not with a sense of triumph, but with a sense of relief. It wasn't about winning. It was about getting back what was mine. And seeing Emily, the woman I had once loved, sitting there, knowing she was losing everything she had taken, was enough for me. I didn't need to see her face again. I didn't need to hear her apologies. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I walked out of the courthouse, my mind finally clearing. As I stepped into the parking lot, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The final step of my plan was about to unfold. I sent the message to Jared. You've lost everything. You chose the wrong side. Don't bother trying to explain. You're done. That was it. The game was over. I didn't hear from Emily again. She disappeared into the legal battles that followed, trying to hold on to whatever scraps she could. Jared, too, was nowhere to be found. The consequences had caught up to them both, and there was no escaping it now. But for me, I was free. Free from the pain, free from the betrayal, and most importantly, free from the life they tried to ruin. I didn't need to fight anymore. The battle had been won in the courtroom, and I walked away with everything I needed to move forward. The weeks following the court ruling were strange. It felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders, but there was still this lingering feeling that something wasn't quite over yet. Emily had lost. Jared had lost. And now they were left to deal with the aftermath of their actions. But I wasn't done yet. I had won the legal battle, but there was one last piece of the puzzle that I needed to finish. The final blow. The part of the plan that would give me complete peace of mind. I needed to make sure that Emily and Jared would never forget what they had done to me. I knew that Emily wasn't going to let it go. She wasn't going to just walk away quietly and accept her loss. I had seen her try to manipulate people before, and I knew she'd do the same now, trying to salvage whatever dignity she could. But this time, I wasn't going to let her. I had one more thing up my sleeve. I had been keeping tabs on everything, making sure I was always a step ahead. The documents, the recordings, the texts, I had them all. And now it was time to release them. I contacted a few trusted people who could help me take this to the next level. I didn't want to just ruin Emily and Jared's financial lives. I wanted to make sure they couldn't escape the consequences. They needed to understand that no matter how much they tried to hide, the truth would always come to light. I wasn't going to let them live their lives without facing the reality of their betrayal. I spent the next week preparing everything. The legal documents, the evidence. I reached out to the press. I had it all ready. And then I made my move. I arranged for an anonymous leak of the full story. Everything about Emily and Jared's affair, the stolen money, the lies, the betrayal. I didn't do it out of spite or anger. I did it for the truth. For everyone who thought they could get away with destroying someone's life and walk away without consequences. Within hours, the news broke. The story went viral. Emily's world came crashing down. Her friends, her family, everyone who had supported her started questioning her. The public saw her for who she really was. Jared? He tried to deny it, tried to claim he was just caught up in the moment. But the evidence was undeniable. They both had nowhere to hide. I watched from the sidelines, feeling a quiet satisfaction. They were getting exactly what they deserved. But this wasn't about gloating. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of it. It was about the truth. It was about making sure they couldn't hide anymore. I was finally free of the life they had tried to take from me. The aftermath of the leak was swift and unforgiving. Emily's friends turned on her. Her family refused to speak to her. And Jared? He lost his job. His reputation was in tatters. His own family turned their backs on him. But me? I was finally able to move on. I didn't need to watch them suffer. I didn't need to take any more pleasure in their downfall. What I needed was to rebuild my life. To take back what was mine. Not just the money, not just the house, but my peace of mind. The days after the story broke felt like a whirlwind. Every time I checked my phone, there was a new notification, a new article, or another person commenting on the situation. The weight of it all was overwhelming, but I wasn't worried. For the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was falling into place. Emily and Jared had made their choices. They had betrayed me in the worst way possible, but now, they had to face the consequences. I had no intention of stopping until I was sure they wouldn't hurt anyone again. The fallout from the press exposure was swift and unforgiving. Emily's friends began to distance themselves from her. Her family turned their backs, unable to support her after everything that came to light. Jared's reputation, which he had worked so hard to build, crumbled in front of his eyes. But the most satisfying part? They still hadn't learned their lesson. They hadn't fully realized what they had lost yet. One evening, I got a call. It was from Emily. Her voice was different this time. Desperate, almost pleading. "Mark, I know I messed up. I know what I did was wrong. But please, can we talk about this? Can we fix this?" I almost laughed. Fix it? She had destroyed everything, and now she was asking me to fix it? "I don't think there's anything left to fix, Emily," I said, my voice calm. "You made your choices. You and Jared both did." "I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. Please, please, just give me a chance to explain. I could hear the panic in her voice. She wasn't just trying to apologize. She was trying to salvage whatever was left of her life. But I wasn't going to give her that chance. Explain what, Emily? How you sold my car. How you emptied our bank account and moved in with my best friend. What could you possibly say to make that right? She fell silent on the other end of the line. And for a moment, I felt a strange satisfaction. She didn't have anything left to say. I didn't need her to explain herself. I didn't need her to beg for forgiveness. What I needed was for her to understand the gravity of what she had done, and for her to live with the consequences. You should have thought about all of this before you made your choices, Emily, I said, my voice final. This is over. You lost. And I'm done with you. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of closure. I had been betrayed. I had been hurt. But now I was walking away with everything, including the peace of mind that they would never be able to hurt me again. But there was one final thing I had to do. I called up the lawyer. We need to finalize the settlement, I said. I want everything. The house, the car, the money. And I want her to understand that she'll be held accountable for everything she did. The lawyer confirmed that everything was in motion, that the last steps of the legal process were underway. I wasn't just getting the house back. I wasn't just getting my money back. I was getting my life back. And that was the most satisfying part of it all. The day of the final hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom, feeling a strange sense of calm. The last few months had been a whirlwind, but now it was all coming to an end. Everything I had been through, the betrayal, the hurt, the anger, it was finally over. I knew Emily and Jared were expecting some kind of dramatic confrontation. They thought I'd show up angry, ready to lash out. But that wasn't how I was playing this. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to yell or scream. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I had already won. This was the final formality, the last step before I could move on with my life. When the judge entered the room, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Everyone stood as he made his way to the bench. Mr. Ellis, Ms. Ellis, he said, his voice steady. We have reviewed the evidence, and based on the findings, I am prepared to make the final ruling. My heart pounded in my chest as he looked over at Emily. I could see the fear in her eyes. She had no idea what was coming, but I did. The judge cleared his throat. This court rules in favor of Mr. Ellis. All assets gained during the marriage are to be returned to him. Additionally, the actions of the defendant, Ms. Emily Ellis, have been found to be both fraudulent and a violation of marital trust. Emily's face went white. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The judge continued. As a result, a financial restitution order will be issued, and Ms. Ellis will be held responsible for the restitution of the stolen funds. Furthermore, any remaining assets will be divided equitably, in accordance with the law. It was over. I didn't need to hear anything more. The satisfaction of hearing those words, the finality of it all, filled me with relief. This was the justice I had been fighting for. I walked out of the courtroom with my lawyer, feeling a weight lifted that I hadn't realized was there. Emily and Jared would never be able to hurt me again. Everything had been set in motion, and nothing could change it now. As I sat in the car, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, but also the strength I found within myself. I had taken my life back, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me again. A few weeks later, I received a final message from Emily. I hadn't heard from her since the ruling, and frankly, I didn't care to. But part of me knew she would try to reach out. She always thought she could fix things. The message read, I know I messed up. I'm sorry for everything. Can we talk? I smiled to myself. No, we couldn't talk. There was nothing left to say. The years that followed were some of the best of my life. I rebuilt my career, my finances, and most importantly, my sense of self-worth. I wasn't the same person I was before all of this happened. I was stronger, smarter, more confident. I met someone new, someone who respected me and valued me for who I was. We started a life together, one built on trust, respect, and mutual support. Emily and Jared? They never recovered from their mistakes. Emily's reputation was tarnished, and Jared lost everything. His job, his friends, his family. The consequences of their betrayal were swift and unforgiving. And though it may sound harsh, I didn't feel sorry for them. They had their chance to make things right, and they chose not to. Thank you for following along with my story. If you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice, revenge, and taking control of your life after betrayal. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. How would you handle a situation like this?